Good evening. Good to see everyone out this evening in the darkness. It's always so strange, especially on Wednesday nights, coming to church after the time change. And it's already dark outside. It feels so much later. I've been ready for bed at about 8 o'clock every night this week, I think. So we are on the last chapter tonight, chapter 13. So we'll close out our study this evening. Last week we talked about responsibility, and was the general theme of the idea, and that we all have responsibilities, things that we're to be doing within the church, things that we are responsible for. And so tonight we'll get a little bit more specific, and honestly, this is a lesson that I need just as much as anyone else. This is something, I know I've talked about this at various points, but it's something that I know I need to do a better job of, that I know I need to put more of a priority on. The title of this chapter is Wake Up, It's Time to Pursue Our Mission. So, let me start off by asking, as the church, what is our mission? Bring souls to Christ. Okay.
Go into all the world.
Go into all the world, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. That's why we call it the Great Commission. It is our mission. It is our goal. It's what we are commanded to go do. We have the greatest commands that are given to us, of course, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Those are the commands that we're given, but we're given those commands, and those should help us then go out and complete that mission, and do that mission that we're given, that task that we're given, to go out into all the world, to preach the gospel, to bring lost souls to Christ. And so, are we doing that? What is our attitude toward that mission? Do we really believe that to be our mission? Do we really understand that? Do we really live our lives according to that? I know as I've studied this, me personally, I know my attitude and the way I think about lost souls and other people maybe doesn't reflect always the right attitude that I should have as a Christian, as a child of God, in the mission that He's given us. He's given us this command. As Patrick said, Jesus tells His disciples, Mark chapter 16, Matthew chapter 28, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Let's read it. I was going to quote it, but my mind went blank. Read from Mark 16. Mark 16, starting in verse 15. And He said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. He who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved, but he who has disbelieved shall be condemned. These signs will accompany those who have believed. In my name they will cast out demons, they will speak with new tongues. So He gives us this command. And He tells us in John chapter 14, verse 15, if you love me, keep my commandments. The greatest command is to love God. If we love Him, we will keep His commandments. And this is one of them, if not the greatest commandment that we've been given, besides loving God, is to go out and tell others about God and what He has done for us and the gospel of His Son. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, here Paul is talking about, the context here is Paul is talking about his rights as a preacher of the gospel. And as a missionary, basically, and that because he is going out and doing these things and teaching, that he is deserving of being taken care of by the churches that he goes and teaches. That is his right, according to God, according to Christ. But he doesn't take advantage of that right in order to not make others look down on him. Starting in verse 15, he says, "But I have used none of these things, and I am not writing these things so that it will be done so in my case. For it would be better for me to die than to have any man make my boast an empty one. For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for I am under compulsion. For woe is me if I do not preach the gospel." This was the attitude that Paul had, that it was something that he was compelled to do. And it was a sin to him. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. He couldn't help but go out and teach the gospel and have this attitude of reaching out to those who are lost. So then, if we understand that we are to obey the commands of God, and that he has commanded us to go and preach and teach and evangelize and reach out to those who are lost, why don't we do it? Why don't we do it more than we do? Those of us that do go out and teach others and reach out to others, why don't we do it more? What is it that keeps us from doing it? We'll talk about that a little bit more, and I want to get some answers to that question. The author says here, the lingering question is, why do so many Christians fail, refuse, or neglect obedience to God's commands? And he references 1 Samuel chapter 15. I'm going to read that there. Read that. Now, this passage, oftentimes, we use this to talk about how when we worship God, we're supposed to worship him the way he would have us to. But I want to look at this a little bit differently. Let's read. We'll read starting in verse 22. Of course, the context here is through the prophet Samuel, God has commanded Saul, king of the nation of Israel at this time, has commanded him to go and completely destroy the Amalekites. These were people that had hindered the Jews on their way to the promised land many years ago under Moses. And God was now taking out his vengeance on these people, on the Amalekites. And the commandment was to completely wipe them out. All the people, all their possessions, all of their livestock, everything. They were to be completely done away with, gone. And Saul decides, well, they've got some really good flocks and some really good herds, and we can use these to help ourselves. And maybe we can get something out of holding on to their king and show how we've, conquered these people and we've captured their king. And so he spares the life of their king, and they spare some of the flocks and the herds and some of their possessions. And we'll actually go back to verse 13. We'll pick up there. Samuel said to Saul, Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the commandment of the Lord." But Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God. But the rest we have utterly destroyed." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Wait, and let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." And he said to him, "Speak." Samuel said, "Is it not true, though you were little in your own eyes, you were made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed you king over Israel? And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, 'Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are exterminated.' Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord?" Then Saul said to Samuel, "I did obey the voice of the Lord and went on the mission in which the Lord sent me, and I have brought back Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the choicest of things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal." Samuel said, "Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." When we look at God's commandments that he's given us, they're not something that we can just pick and choose what we want to do. We often live that way. We kind of have that attitude. We feel like, well, I'm good at this, so I don't have to worry about this. I'll just focus on this so I don't have to do these other things. When God has commanded us to reach out to others, to preach the gospel. But sometimes we just decide, well, I don't feel like doing that. I don't want to do that. I'm not good at doing that. But the same could be said of us here, what Samuel said to Saul. What the author says here in the book, he says one reason, in response to the question of why do so many fail or refuse to obey God's commands, one reason is that many have confused the rituals of Christianity with the responsibilities of Christianity. They see attending worship services as an end within itself rather than a means of equipping them for fulfilling spiritual responsibilities. God is more interested in obedience than he is in ritual. And this is when he mentions here what Samuel says to Saul here. And this is eye-opening. This is, as I was reading this and thinking about this, I had never really thought about this passage in that context. Like I said, I'd always thought about this in the idea of when we worship, we should worship according to how God has commanded us. And that's true. And we can absolutely learn that from what is said here. But the same is true of any command that God has given to us. And if we willfully neglect his commands, then what does that say about our worship to him and his acceptance of our worship to him? You know, Saul was saying here, well, yes, we spared some of these things, but we did it so that we could offer them to God and worship to God. And God's response is, I don't want that worship. I want you to obey my commandments. I want you to do what I said to do. Just because your motives sound good doesn't make it right. And often we want to think that way. We want to think, well, my motives are good. My motives are pure. I'm doing what I think is best. But God says, obey. Do what I've asked you to do, not what you think is best, not what we in our human wisdom think is best. He goes on to say, yes, God commanded sacrifices of the Jews, just as he has commanded that we worship him in spirit and in truth. So to think that mere outward compliance is all he wants misses the point of obedience from the inside out. The Pharisees were classic examples of outward show, but inwardly their hearts weren't committed to God's will. If you looked at the Pharisees and what they were doing, they looked like they had it made. They were doing everything right. They were coming to services every time, sitting in the pews, singing the songs, doing what they were supposed to do from a ritualistic outside viewpoint. But were they really doing everything the way God wanted, the way God intended, according to all his commandments? Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." We can't rely on our own wisdom, our own view of things to guide us and help us decide what are we going to do and what are we not going to do. So getting back to our mission, and that's the point he makes here. We need to wake up to the mission of the church and what we are supposed to be doing. Again, I'm reading a lot from what he says here, more than I have in some of the past lessons, but I think he makes a lot of really good points here. And this goes back again to even the first lesson we had this quarter. He says, the bride of Christ is not on earth to entertain, make people feel better through self-help mantras, fill pockets with money, or create a self-pleasing environment. We're not here to make people feel good. We're not here for that consumerist approach that we've mentioned and we've talked about. The church is on a rescue mission to snatch people out of the fire, build faith in the rescued, and send them back into the world on a rescue mission. That's the mission. That's the plan. We're to go out there. We're to bring the lost in here. We're to train and equip and build and grow and strengthen and send them back out so that they can do the same thing. He mentions, and I've heard this quote before, or something similar to it. I forget, we may have actually mentioned it in an earlier lesson. They said, evangelism is the last thing we do and the first thing we give up. Few congregations are obeying the Great Commission with any fervor in their communities. Many are dying because no new members are being added to the church. And then he mentions this extreme example, and it seems so strange to think about this. He said, a few years ago, I visited a congregation that was using the baptistry as a storage space. That was their attitude. That was where they had gotten as a congregation, that the baptistry wasn't something that needed to be used. They emptied all the water out and used it for storage. And the response was, well, if somebody decides they want to be baptized, there's a church across town, we can go use theirs. If that's the attitude, if that's where we get, where we view that as something that's not needed, something that doesn't need to be prepared and ready at all times, we've already forgotten what the mission is. We've already lost sight of what the mission is. And the idea is, this made me think of, while I was at Freed Hardeman, I actually took a class one year. One of the, when you go to a Christian college, every year you have to take at least, or every semester, you have to take a Bible course of some kind, part of the Bible department. And I actually took a class that was about mission work. And, it talked about how local congregations can support mission work, how missionaries can go about doing their work, and various things like that. And one of the things that stuck with me the most from that class, because it applies not just to churches out in mission fields, but to any church. And it's the idea that as you're going and you're building a church, that you build it to be a germinal church as opposed to a terminal church. The idea being that you're planting that germ, you're planting that seed in there that will continue to grow. That you are building Christians that will continue to build more Christians. And that plant, that seed, will continue to grow and grow and grow for generations. Instead of being a terminal church where you're not reaching out, you're not looking beyond who's already in the pews and what we can do just for those that are in the pews already. And there's no vision, there's no mission to reach out beyond that and continue to grow. And so that's the attitude that we need to have, that we are seeking to grow. I'll be honest, I'll be blunt. We've experienced some loss recently. We've experienced some reduction recently. And that's disappointing. That's discouraging. But that should motivate us even more to reach out and grow, reach out and bring others in. That's why I'm so glad we're doing this Friends Day. I love this idea that the elders have come up with, to emphasize, to focus the idea of inviting those that we know outside of this body, our friends, our acquaintances, people that we work with. You know, we should be doing this all the time, but it's good to have an opportunity like this to focus on that idea and that effort to bring people in here and invite them, to show them that we want to be your friends, and this is what, to us, being a friend means.
Amen.
That to be a friend of someone, we should want to share this amazing blessing, this amazing gift that we have been given. If we know the gospel, we know the good news, and we're not sharing it with our friends, what kind of friend are we? Are they really our friends? What kind of attitude does that show about us?
Now, you're making a good point about our mindset, how we see not only ourselves individually, but how we're looking at ourselves congregationally. And I think sometimes it's a matter of how we look at things. I remember you mentioned the baptistry being a storage unit. When I first started preaching many years ago, I was 20 years old, and I noticed the baptistry was not hooked up. There was no plumbing to it. We were just sitting on blocks, just sitting in the back. And I asked why it was not hooked up. I mean, they'd recently moved a wall and done some renovation in the building. And I was told, we haven't had a baptism in years. And I remember I was young, and back then I was probably a little more sarcastic. Not that way anymore, But I said, well, maybe we haven't had any baptism because you haven't been planning to have baptism. So on that, the next visit meeting, it was decided that we would put the plumbing together, we would hook the baptistry up, and that next year we had 10 baptisms. And they said that was more baptism than they'd ever seen. And I'm like, well, it's just a matter of the way you look at things, how if you're preparing for it, if that's what you're thinking about, if that's what you're emphasizing, then that's likely what you're going to see. But when you get to that terminal mindset where you're sitting on your laurels and you don't feel the need to do anything, maybe as you mentioned, sometimes the discouragement that you find yourself in at the moment, maybe is just really a good wake-up call, from the good Lord, who's saying, it's time to get back to work and get out of the cave and start doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, very good point. I've had that thought in recent days that you can take discouragement and things like that and let it fester, let it bring you down, or you can use it as an opportunity to push you to do better, to grow and do more. And going back to the baptistry example as well, what effect or impact is the invitation going to have if we're not ready for someone to respond to it? So,
Chris,
very good point.
I
Yes.
found it to be a rather strange phenomenon, I guess is a better word, than doing a lot of door knocking and door-to-door evangelism over the years. I noticed that young people and middle-aged people generally in a congregation that want to go with you off to somewhere else in the state or another country or whatever, and they will do so. And they will get out and evangelize and seem to be glad to do it. But those same persons, it's like pulling teeth to get them to knock doors next door where they live. I've never understood that mindset, but it's a peculiar trait that humans seem to have.
Yeah, I've noticed the same thing. I've been guilty of the same thing as well. I don't know if it's a matter of, these are the people that I know and that I have to live around and deal with, and, but the idea of fear of rejection or fear of what they're going to think of me or whatever, and it becomes so much easier when this is somebody I don't know at all and will probably never see again. And so if they reject me, then so what? And of course we lose sight of the fact that they're not rejecting us, they're rejecting God. And that's kind of one of the things, that's where I wanted to spend the rest of the time, is talking about, these different reasons why we don't do these things. But I've experienced the same thing. I've done that. I've helped out in campaigns and mission efforts when we lived in Germany. When I was in school, we went to Scotland and Belgium, and I've done door knocking and passing out all this stuff. But then it comes time to do it here, and it's like you said, it's almost human nature or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but we shy away from it, and we don't want to do it. So he talks about several reasons, and he actually mentions that various surveys have kind of led him to this list, surveys that he's studied and things that he's come across. So the first one he mentions is that maybe one of the reasons we're not reaching out is that we don't really believe the lost are really lost. We don't understand. We may say the words and hear these things taught, but we don't, for whatever reason, understand the urgency or understand that fully, that these people around me are lost. I know I'm kind of guilty of that as well, until it hits me sometimes when I'm sitting at work around people that I'm with, or people in our neighborhood or whatever, and have the thought, if the Lord comes back right now, all these people that I'm with, where are they going? What's going to happen to them? They're not saved. They're not a part of the body of Christ. And that's a sobering thought. Although unfortunately it doesn't always lead me into action like it should. But he references Mark chapter 8. We'll start in verse 34. And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." You know, a man's soul, our souls, here, the idea that he's expressing here in verse 36 is that one soul, even one soul, is greater in value than this whole world. That's a rhetorical question he asks. What will it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? And the answer is nothing. The implication being that our soul is worth more than this whole world and everything that this life has to offer. Our soul is more important than that, and every soul in this world is just as important. So we need to understand that and understand the value of a soul, and those whose souls are not saved, how we need to view them and how we need to act and what we need to do. Of course, the next one is failing to take seriously the priority that Jesus gave to evangelism in the Great Commission. We've come up with that name. Obviously, that wasn't what Jesus called it. We've come up with this term, the Great Commission. But it is this mission that he sends them out to do. And by implication, he says that they are to make disciples. And the implication then being that those disciples would go and do this same thing, teaching them to observe all things I have commanded you. Teaching others is one of the things he commanded them. So then they must command others to teach others. Some people, I've heard some people try to argue that the Great Commission was only for those apostles that were there with Jesus that day. And I don't understand how you can say that when he is saying, teach all things I have commanded you. And this wasn't the first time he had commanded them to go out and teach others. He had sent them out, what we call the limited commission, to the people of Israel and the people of Judah. But we are under this commission as well. We are under this command just as much as those apostles that were there on that day. The next one he mentions, and I want to talk about this one a little bit. He says, in some congregations, the sharing of the gospel has been neglected or given only lip service because the emphasis has been turned inward. Housekeeping is a priority. Busyness is an end within itself. Programs, he says with an exclamation point. The end in mind seems to be bigger and better programs, none of which are converting sinners from the errors of their ways. Now, this isn't to say that we shouldn't have some programs or efforts or good works that we do within the church that are part of the church as a whole. But the focus, the emphasis, the outcome of any of those efforts should ultimately be to bring souls to Christ. Now, some of these efforts may be geared toward, we've been focusing this year, we're trying to focus on fellowship. We had a couple weeks ago a good time of fellowship here at the building. We've got another one coming up in a little over a week that the Mitchums are hosting at their house. A time for all of us to get together and fellowship. And that is something that we're commanded to do. And that is something that we should do. But again, the goal of fellowship is to strengthen one another, to encourage one another, to build each other up, to gain strength from the love that we have for each other, so that we can then go out and do what we're supposed to do and reach out to others.
Before you get too far gone into your lesson, I wanted to just make a point that as we are Christians, before we can go out and teach others, the gospel tells us to study to show ourselves approved. And the word germinal church that you were talking about is here. We have the opportunity, each one of us, to come each week to study God's Word. And as we study, that's where the germination of life or vigorousness comes to us. We have the Georgia School of Preaching here and biblical studies. And we have lessons going on each week that are designed to give us a better insight, not just the generality of the Bible, but specifically each book of the Bible. And in doing so, it gives us the knowledge that we know what we're talking about, so we can go out and talk and teach others.
Yeah, and even just this time, Bible class, like you said, those are great opportunities and something I wish I could make more use of, need to make time for. But even just Bible class, and I know, of course, the old term, I'm preaching to the choir here. You all are here in Bible class to learn, but I wish so many in the church would understand the importance of times like this.
Sometimes the choir needs preaching too.
But the idea that, of course we should be studying on our own. Just simply coming to Bible class isn't enough. We need to study on our own and study to show ourselves approved, and we need to grow and learn to get out there and reach others. But yeah, we need to make sure that the things that we're doing as a congregation and the things that we're doing individually, that ultimately the goal of those things is to reach the lost. Our Dorcas ministry is a great work that we are doing here, a great effort that is going on here. And on the surface, it's about providing for the needs of those in the community that have some needs for food and clothing and whatever. But the idea behind that is that we are showing the love of Christ, that we are showing the community who God commands us to be, the people that we are supposed to be, and because of that, then hopefully bring those people into the body of Christ. So, and I know we have that mindset and that attitude in that work, and we've got so much information down there for those people, tracks and videos and lessons. And I know Brother Gray is here during those times to be able to study with people if that's what they want. And so those are the types of things that we need to be doing and we need to be focusing on, that are directed at bringing souls to Christ. This one's interesting as well. Our concept of God has a direct impact on how we respond to the command to share the gospel. And the verse he references is Isaiah chapter 6. And I want to go and read that, because I think it's interesting. In the year of King Uzziah's death, starting in verse 1, of Isaiah chapter 6. In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And he called out to another and said, and one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. And he touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here am I, send me. If we really had this image and this understanding of the glory and the greatness and the awesomeness and the power of God that Isaiah experienced here, when that question came up, who will go for us? How could you respond any other way than, Here am I, send me? To stand before the glory of God and to hear him ask, Who will go? How can we respond any other way? Now, unfortunately, we don't have this ability to physically see what Isaiah saw. But if we believe that Isaiah saw this, if we believe what is in this word, and that this is truly the glory and the power and the awesomeness of God, how can we say no to him? How can we deny his request, his command? I think sometimes we lose sight of that. I know we do. I know I do. I don't think about how great God is. We sit in an air-conditioned room and padded pews that, yes, are good and wonderful and make it easier for us to sit here and study and focus. But sometimes we lose sight of the glory and the awesomeness of God. Honestly, I think for me sometimes being out at places like camp, where you're not in an air-conditioned pew, you're out there in nature. If you're out there during the summer, it can be hot. But you're out there in the beauty of God's creation. And that's really where we can see the glory of God. That's how we can see him now. And he tells us that he's proclaimed himself through creation, that we can see him through creation. When we sit out there and see how beautiful and awesome and glorious it is, it makes worshiping him so much easier and so much more glorious. And not to take away from what we do here in the congregation, the corporate worship that we should do and we need to do. But when you're in a situation that makes you think about the glory of God and the power of God, and we need to do that here each and every Lord's Day that we come here and worship him. Even on Wednesday nights when we're singing, that we should be thinking about how amazing God is. And if we did, what would that change about the way we act and how we do things and how we go about fulfilling his commands? And we're almost out of time. There's a few more that he talks about. Of course, motivation being one of them. And we kind of talked about that with understanding who God is, and that should motivate us even more. Another one that he mentions And this is the one I feel like I fall into so many times, and not just about this, but so many other things. Procrastinating. I'll get around to it. I'll get there one day. I'll be able to do this sometime. And the verse he mentions is John 4:35. And he said, "Do you not say, there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest." He's saying, now is the time to do it. Now is the time to get it done. The fields are white unto harvest. We should be working now. We should be doing it now. The other big one, we've mentioned this already, is fear. We don't want to lose friends. We don't want to make people angry. We don't want, we live in a society, in a world where the mindset of evangelism is almost, I can't think of the word, but it's the idea of evangelism is frowned upon. That we would even say to someone, you're not living your life right. There is a true way to live. There is truth out there. The world is so against that idea. We talked about these different mindsets: liberalism, plurality, secularism. That everybody's okay. There's no abject truth. Whatever makes you feel good is okay. You can't tell me how to live my life. Those ideas are so pervasive that it makes it so difficult sometimes to reach out to others and to evangelize to others and to make them understand that, no, that's not right. Living that way is not the way God wants us to live. Worshiping him that way is not how he wants us to worship him. This is the way we need to live our lives. And so many people look down on that idea. So, didn't really get to necessarily my conclusion. It's interesting in the very back of the book, in the end of this lesson, he actually encourages people to do a self-evaluation and answer yes or no to these questions. I have shared the gospel in the past month, or I have shared the gospel in the past 3 months, or in the last 6 months, the last 12 months, or I have never shared the gospel. So he's asking people to be honest with themselves. Be honest with yourself. If you were to answer these questions, how would you answer? What is your attitude? How do you view evangelism and this command that God has given us to go into all the world and to preach the gospel, to share the good news? Again, I think that's another thing. If we really thought about what the gospel means, this idea of good news. When we've got good news, we want to share it with people, right? So we need to have that attitude of always reaching out and sharing with people. So thank you all so much for this quarter, for listening to me talking a lot, for your comments. I hope that you've gotten something out of it. I know I have gotten a great deal out of this study, so thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Great class. You did a very good job this quarter. Appreciate you standing in. Lord's willing, next Wednesday evening we're going to begin a series on church history, and you're talking about evangelism. I certainly would like to see this class used as an evangelistic tool and our opportunity. I'm going to be presenting the material from the standpoint that I believe will help someone to come to an understanding of the Lord's church and how to identify the Lord's church, and of course how to become a member and that sort of thing. So certainly want to encourage you to be a part of that series that begins, like I said, Lord's willing, next Wednesday evening.
Do we have an invitation song that you've announced yet? 585. You just announced it. I did. Thank you. 585. Ladies' night out, Little Hawaiian in Carrollton tomorrow at 6:30 to enjoy dinner together. Don't forget fellowship meal, Perk Up the Pantry, Sunday for the Savior will be this Sunday. Specific needs for the pantry include ramen noodles, macaroni and cheese, and fruit and proteins. Those things don't seem like they really go together, but that's what we need for the pantry at this time. Area-wide youth devotional this Sunday, the 11th, hosted by Piedmont Road. It will start at 4 p.m. with singing and a devotional, with a regular evening service following. Dinner and singing will follow and should be finished sometime around 7:30. So please be aware of this also. Macy is continuing to recover. She has been in a lot of pain, but she is recovering nicely. And certainly want to remember Macy Hooten in our prayers from her surgery. Also, Tommy Tidwell is going to be seeing a specialist next week about his back injury and what they're going to be doing to treat him from the injury he incurred last week. Also, Bonnie Hedrick is going to be not with us much longer, apparently. The news I just received before we began service this evening was that she may not make it through the night. Well, I know, yes, ma'am, but that's my mother's niece. But anyway, she may not make it through the night, or certainly it's imminent. And I certainly want to remember this family in our prayers this evening. Brother Robert Davison is also going to be going to see an orthopedic surgeon to see about some of the injuries he incurred recently from his fall. And so I want to remember him also in our prayers. Are there any other announcements we need to make? I know we got a hayride coming up at the Mitchums, and that date is 17th. Okay, well that's what week? That's week, right? Week. That's it's Saturday week. It's week. Saturday week. Okay. All right. Yes.
If anyone has extra men's belts, the pantry needs those also.
Men's belts for the pantry. If you can donate some of those, we certainly would appreciate it. Anything else? We're going to be singing the song that's been announced as an opportunity for encouragement. I like this time of our service at the end when we've been studying the Word of God together and it's fresh on our minds and we're thinking about spiritual things. I pray that if there is anyone present tonight who needs to respond, perhaps you've been thinking about it and you just didn't know when the right time was, well, let me encourage you to make that this time, this very moment, when we stand to sing this song of invitation. If you need to obey the gospel or be restored to your rightful place among the people of God, please let that need be known while together we stand and as we sing.